Welcome to From Chaos to Code, Rebuilding the Iron Mind, where we talk about the real side of men's health. Not the Instagram highlight reel, not the fake stoicism, but the honest effects that happen when life hits you harder than any workout ever could. I'm your host, Ricardo, and I've lived a few different lives. Teacher, property manager, MMA promoter, garage mechanic, handyman, empath. I've been the man everyone leans on, the one who fixes things. Until the weight of it all almost broke me. Here, we want to talk about what that really costs. When being the strong one becomes survival instead of strength. How burnout, silence, and pride slowly eat away at you until you realize you've built armor so thick that you can't even breathe under it. This isn't about weakness, it's about rebuilding. Learning that real strength isn't about how much you can carry. It's about knowing when to set it down. So let's start there, with the cost of being the strong one and what it actually takes to reclaim your iron mind. Welcome back to From Chaos to Code, Season 1, Episode 2, Part 3 of What I Learned from Losing Myself, Recognizing and Rebuilding Boundaries, a 3-part discussion. Today's discussion is going to conclude our 3-part podcast segment, and it's entitled The Psychology of Control. What I Learned About Manipulation. Now, when I started healing from these relationships, if I can call them that, I realized I wasn't crazy. It wasn't me being weak. It wasn't me not having a code anymore. I still had strength. I still had my code. The problem was, I had been conditioned. I had been caught in a pattern that psychologists actually have names for. So the entire purpose of today's podcast is to articulate these terms. Because once you know the terms, you start seeing the game. And once you see the game, you never fall for it again. Now, I didn't just learn this from Instagram or some sort of self-research or bro science or anybody that isn't qualified. I actually had to speak to therapists and psychologists to understand these terms and have them told to me through my own lived experiences. So my hope in that sharing this with all of you listeners is that you will be able to understand the core psychological patterns I learned also. And when you recognize them, you can name them and not fall into that conditioning. Now, the very first psychological pattern I learned is called DARVO. Deny, attack, and reverse the victim and offender. Now, DARVO is a manipulation tactic that isn't just used by toxic partners in relationships. I've actually seen people use this in business. I've seen them use it in everyday conversations, and it is a manipulation tactic. It's where someone gets called out for hurting you or crossing a boundary, and instead of taking accountability, they flip it. They deny what happened, they attack your character, and then reverse the roles so that you look like the problem. Now, the whole entire part of this 3-part series that we're discussing is boundaries. So when you bring up a boundary to someone for discussion, it's with the hope that there will be a discussion about that boundary and healthy communication, the same way that if someone brings that up to you, you should also be responding and the like. But if you say something to your partner about a boundary, such as, hey, When we were arguing earlier, and you raised your voice and started screaming, I found it very disrespectful and unnecessary. And instead of owing it, they say something like, "You're too sensitive," or "You make me yell because you never listen." So what happened is you came to them in a moment of vulnerability. And in doing so, they see an opportunity for attack instead of seeing this vulnerable behavior as out of the norm and focusing on solving what you're bringing up. Instead, you find that suddenly you're apologizing for bringing it up. Now, the first few times this happens, you might have the strength to enforce that boundary. But what happens with manipulative individuals is it's the constant and consistent battle they bring forth that eventually tires you out. So it becomes easier to concede and apologize than actually enforce your boundaries. And then the next time you want to do something like this again, you want to bring something up, you've been indirectly conditioned to not bring up your own code. So if every time you voice your feelings are hurt and then you end up apologizing for verbalizing and communicating, you're not communicating with a partner. You are in a control loop of their design. Accountability has to go both ways, not just one. Now, the next psychology definition I want to bring up, I hear overused, so I'm going to use it in a very general sense. Gaslighting. Now, this is where your reality is being undermined. So, gaslighting is when someone makes you doubt what you saw, heard, or felt. Now, if you've ever looked into this term, it is very extreme to the point where it's almost delusional. I'm using it in a very general sense here. I'm using it in the sense of psychological erosion. It's slow, it's constant, and it's designed to make you depend on their version of the truth. And the reason you start to depend on their version of the truth is because you've brought forth boundaries, but once again, they're being violated with such consistency that you just don't have the energy to enforce them anymore. And what gaslighting does is it invalidates your legitimate emotions and feelings. They might tell you that never happened. You're overreacting. I never said that. And at first, it's a very conscious second guessing. But eventually, you fall into the partner's control loop and you start second guessing your own memory just to keep the peace. It almost becomes an internal control system that you have rather than the external one. When it comes down to it, healthy love validates experience. Now, what do I mean by healthy love validates experience? I mean, if you're bringing something forward, there's going to be a discussion about it. They're going to take your experience as you present it. And that is going to lead the discussion. If your reality keeps getting rewritten every argument, that's not love. It's control. And it's manipulation. So once again, our other conversations were on healthy boundaries. This podcast, this third portion, is about how manipulative and controlling individuals break down those boundaries. Our third term is something called projection, blaming you for what they're doing. This is when someone accuses you of what they are actually doing. It's a way to dodge guilt and accountability and create confusion for yourself, so you start questioning your own code. And the big question that always comes to mind is why. Why are they doing this? Who knows? That's their own internal issue to discover. What they want you to do is they want you to sit there and spend all of your energy on trying to focus on the why, because when you've exhausted your energy, you're easier to control. A real man needs energy. They need time to reflect. If you're exhausting that energy trying to discover the why, that doesn't give you energy to reinforce your boundaries. So spend that energy on breaking the pattern when you see it, or removing yourself entirely. For example, your partner could accuse you of being secretive while they're hiding their own lies. Accuse you of not caring while they withhold affection. It's a sort of verbal sleight of hand crafted to dodge their own accountability. I spent so much time trying to figure out why this was happening in my relationships that I came up with some loose understandings. But I stopped myself before I went in depth and tried to figure out someone else's mind. Once again, that's not my problem. That's their own internal issue and their own discovery. But I've found that in the past, if someone's employing this tactic, it's because they have an inability to deal with their own emotional faults and issues. And we talked in past podcasts about them trying to make you their emotional regulator. That's what projection does. It's trying to make you regulate their emotions so that they can hide the fact they are not taking accountability for their behavior. And that if they were to actually put the work in to try and solve the root cause of their beliefs and behaviors, they probably would crumble under that pressure. So instead of taking responsibility for their actions, they place them on you. Once again, do not spend time trying to discover the specific roots of their behavior. It's a waste of your time and energy. It's out of your control. That is their issue. So when you start to hear accusations that seem to come out of nowhere, pause. It's probably their own mirror talking, not your truth, and not your code. Now, we talked about this term in one of the past episodes. The fourth term that I learned from psychology is trauma bonding. It's the hook that keeps you there in this manipulative, controlling relationship. Trauma bonding happens when cycles of abuse and affection create a chemical addiction. This is where you hear the term addicted to drama. It's not drama. It's the brain linking stress and reward with love. You crave the apology after the pain because it feels like relief. It's these spikes and these drops. But once you've had that massive drop, then you know there's going to be a spike again. And you look forward to it. Your body starts to crave that spike, even though you've had all of these drops that happen afterwards. They might scream at you, accuse you of something. Then come the tears. Then comes the affection they've been withholding, and they say, I just love you so much. Now that pattern releases cortisol, the stress hormone, then dopamine. That's the same chemistry as addiction, and we're going to cover that in a future podcast. Now, you're not addicted to drama. You're not addicted to this person who you see as this sweet poison you need. You're addicted to the relief that comes from that temporary break in the chaos. And at first it feels like relief, but as I've discussed further, then this starts to break you down. What a lot of manipulative and controlling people don't realize is this is their own self-sabotage. You only have so much energy that they can exhaust before you don't even look for that relief. And when you try and break the bond with them, it feels like withdrawal. That's not weakness. You're strong. What's happening is you're fighting biology. You're fighting that cortisol and dopamine. And the sooner you can break away from it, the better. But in order to break away from it, you need to be able to recognize and articulate this feeling to yourself. Now, I talked about that cortisol, stress hormone, and then that dopamine, that release. How do you break this? How do you make this healthy in the moment? So once you recognize and articulate this to yourself, you have to go somewhere from there. There's a number of healthy mechanisms that you can do when you see this pattern start to hit. First off, when there's that cortisol, that stress spike because of a fight, you need to remove yourself. You remove yourself as instantaneously as possible because you don't want to start associating them and their changed behavior. I say changed because it's just a quick change for control. You don't want to associate that with dopamine. You need to find a healthy dopamine. So once you've removed yourself, find something positive to engage with. It might be calming music to get rid of that cortisol. Maybe a quick message to a friend or family member. It could be some deep breathing, physical movement. These are all very simple aspects. When we do our podcast on dopamine, I'll talk about specific techniques for breathing, physical movement, what you can do in order to regulate yourself. Your code means that you're responsible. But what you need to do is anything to distract your brain from that false dopamine associated with that controlling, manipulative, trauma-bonded pattern. Another psychological aspect I learned is control through guilt. This is where the aspect of I'm hurt becomes weaponized. So guilt control uses emotion as a leash. They don't say something like, please, I would appreciate it if. Instead, they turn it onto you with guilt. How could you? It's designed to make you serve their comfort at the expense of your peace. It's designed to force you to reflect on something that causes you to question your own moral code, to create a power imbalance in their favor. A lot of this happens when you try to set up independent boundaries, when you try to live your life, so to speak, outside of them. I just wanted to spend time with you, but I guess you don't care. If you really loved me, you'd have called. If I was your priority, you would have checked in on me before going to see your friends, your family, an event. Those lines sound like care, but they are not. Those lines turn care into compliance. Authentic care doesn't need a dictatorship for when it has to happen. Nor should you be packing your bags for a guilt trip every time you communicate with your partner. You have that preparation. You know you're going to get guilted. You pause before you call. You pause before you send that message because you know what's coming. And once again, this is just breaking down your energy. This is just ensuring they have control over your behavior and independence. Real love invites discussion. It invites communication. It doesn't coerce behavior to fit their control needs. If your love has conditions, it's not partnership. It's performance. Now, in the first part of this 3-part podcast, I talked about isolation. Because eventually what happens is your energy drains so much that you stop having energy to engage with day-to-day life. You stop having energy to engage with the healthy aspects of your life. The 6th psychological portion that happens to someone when dealing with controlling or manipulative individuals is isolation. It's the silent setup. That's where your world slowly shrinks. Fewer friends, fewer hobbies, less self. A lot of the time we say that it's as if you're locked in a cage, but it's not a cage. A cage at least has equal parameters. This becomes a funnel. A controlling or manipulative individual might say, I don't like your friends. Or I don't like a specific friend. I don't like a coworker. Or your family doesn't treat you right. They might question why you feel the need to go out. Are they not enough? They might work in some of that guilt. I don't know what you do when I'm not around. How can I trust you? And before you know it, you're trying to explain a negative. You can't explain the absence of something. And it drains your energy. And before you know it, your only safe space is with them. You slowly erode away your friendships, communication with your circle, your hobbies, even your self-care. Because the energy it takes to battle and justify every interaction outside of your relationship becomes so draining that it's easier to just concede those relationships and self-care practices in order to avoid the burnout and crash that comes with constant defense. And this goes back to that trauma bonding. When you're with them, they're probably a wonderful partner. But that's because they are in full control of you and your behavior. You're sacrificing your independence and code in order to stabilize their behavior. Isolation is the manipulator's favorite trick. A partner who keeps you small does not love you. They fear losing control of you. Now, this next term, I guarantee you have heard. But a lot of the time, this term is not used in conjunction with the behavior that happens afterwards. Our 7th psychology term is love bombing, but it also is followed by devaluation. So love bombing and devaluation go hand in hand to create a cycle of control. Now, if you haven't heard of love bombing, it's that honeymoon explosion of affection, attention, and promises until you're really hooked into this person. So initially, the constant communication, text messages, phone calls, shares on social media, maybe even a risque photo or two. All of these behaviors feed the facade that they are obsessed with you and only you. It doesn't mean that you're an egomaniac. They're playing with your biology. It becomes dopamine for you. A positive spike in your association with them, this external validation. In a future podcast episode, we're going to talk about that when we discuss dating. And are you dating for social communication, or are you dating for validation? Now, love bombing might even come in the form of gifts or future promising. It's always future promising. What happens eventually is that devaluation starts to creep in. Love bombing can eventually be turned against you and weaponized. So the first time you do not act, behave, or maybe speak the way they want you to, they can withdraw these gifts. They can blame your behavior, or maybe lack thereof, for the withdrawal. And this is where devaluation comes into play, when nothing you do is enough. Nothing you do can return you to that honeymoon explosion. This is where that term goalpost starts to come in. This is where the goalposts start to move. They become foggy and unclear. And so does your perception of yourself, of your own code. So you start to adapt to what they want or what you think they want. But it's never enough. It's never correct no matter what you do. Every time you think you have aligned yourself with self-regulatory behavior that your partner will finally approve of and stop the constant stress you feel, it will always be wrong on your part. It's the cycle that keeps you chasing the high of seeking approval so you can finally have a moment of peace. But that peace will never come. Because if you truly were able to align yourself with their expectations, they would lose their control over you. And you would be sacrificing your own code, your own boundaries, in order to have this peace. So 1 week it might be, you're my soulmate. And the next is, you've changed. But the vagueness of that, you've changed, comes without explanation, comes without any articulation of how or why they think. And you find you're spending the whole relationship trying to get back to that first version that gave you some sort of peace and connection, even if it was false. Keep in mind, consistency is love. Chaos, wrapped in flattery, is manipulation. Now, I've said this before, and in some sort of facetious, ironic, hilarious way, I find that it's apt behavior for these individuals to be self-sabotaging. They never really realize they're self-sabotaging in the long run, but once you run out of energy, there's nowhere to go except to exit the relationship. The eighth psychological term that we're going to discuss is called the exit trap, where they just want to talk for closure. So if and when you finally have reached a breaking point and you're on your way to rediscovering or reclaiming your code and self and setting boundaries that you are ready to enforce, your manipulator will reappear. And they're going to reappear as their best self. Calm, polite, reflective. The medium they choose to communicate could vary. It could be text message, videos, voice recordings, phone calls, whatever they choose to do, they're coming strategically on their part. They'll employ this tactic when they feel you are slipping from their grasp and control. They may even ask about you and how you are doing, how you're feeling, and what might feel sympathetic behavior, or a chance to finally speak your emotions in a safe place, is just a trap. Now, these behaviors might be interspersed enough between their more blatant controlling behaviors or after you finally said enough and ended the relationship, but if they have repeatedly violated your code and the boundaries that you've set out, they're only looking for this idea of closure to manipulate you back into their control. It's not growth on their part. It's bait. They might say, I just want to understand what went wrong, or we can end things respectfully. It doesn't have to end like this. But that talk's always going to end with guilt or tears or blame. It's all designed to draw you back into their control and away from the potential return to your code. It's a prevention of your own self-growth. I spoke prior about you don't need consent for closure. Closure isn't conversation. If it's a manipulative individual who has repeatedly violated your boundaries, no communication. Closure isn't a meeting, it's a decision you make by not reopening the door. Now, if you listen to the first two parts of this podcast, you'll know that there's a progression. In the first, I had to share my own experiences with this sort of behavior. I'm only pausing because I am very uncomfortable in saying that. I didn't want to, but I needed to, in order to lead to the second one of what healthy boundaries for men are. And then this third portion of the podcast is teaching how manipulation works. Let's go into the actual psychology and articulation of it so that you can recognize and you can end it. Most of us don't get taught how manipulation works. We just learn it the hard way. But when you can name it, you can see it. When you see it, you can stop it. Boundaries don't just protect you from others. They protect you from losing yourself. Thanks for listening. That's it for today's episode of From Chaos to Code, Rebuilding the Iron Mind. If something in this hit you, take a second to sit with it before you scroll away. Write it down, apply it, share it with a brother who might need to hear it. The whole goal here isn't perfection, it's progress. Real men doing the real work of getting stronger, clearer, and more grounded every day. If you want to keep these conversations going, subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen. And if you want to stay around after the episode, I'll be releasing tracks I've made using my own writing and AI music development. Each episode will feature a new track in a variety of genres that I use to express myself. Keep the chaos in check and keep the code alive. I appreciate all of you. Thanks for listening.
Find someone who does not smother the intensity that burns within. Let them feel the flame without trying to extinguish it. I have scribbled my last love note on the periphery of your heart, hoping it will sink deeper. One life, one love, let me love you forever. Heavy is the crown we wear, but I hope I can be the love of your life. Unlovable is the word you tattooed on your skin, but I see the beauty in your scars. Relinquish control of love and let me hold you without breaking you. One life, one love, let me love you forever. Heavy is the crown we wear, but I hope I can be the love of your life. I see you struggle to keep your walls tall, to protect what's left inside. But love doesn't conquer with force. It waits, it lingers, it whispers until you let it in. You are not your past, you are not your fear. You are the storm, and I'll stand in the rain. I'll take your hand when you're ready, and we'll walk, even if the path crumbles beneath us. One life, one love, let me love you forever. Heavy is the crown we wear, but I hope I can be the love of your life. You fear being unworthy, but I will carry the weight with you until it feels like nothing. Let me be your anchor, not your chains. One life, one love, let me love you forever. Heavy is the crown we wear, but I hope I can be the love of your life. Relinquish control, let love wash over you. Find someone who lets you burn, but never lets you fade. And I'll be here if you'll have me. One life, one love, let me love you forever. Heavy is the crown we wear, but I hope I can be the love of your life. Relinquish control, let love wash over you. Find someone who lets you burn, but never lets you fade. And I'll be here if you'll have